In the spirit of respect, authenticity, and reconciliation, the town of Slave Lake honors and acknowledges that we are situated on the traditional lands of Sauge First Nation within Treaty 8 territory, home to Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit people who have occupied these lands since time immemorial. We'll now call this meeting to order. Councillor Brandel.
I move that we accept the agenda as presented.
Okay, any discussion? Call to question those in favor. And that is carried. Minutes of previous meetings. Councillor
I
Ferguson.
just have an amendment here, motion 144-23. It wasn't me that ended up making the motion. I believe it was Councillor Adams. Because I wasn't present, so I wasn't able to make that motion.
Okay, move to adopt.
Right.
Do you have that, Ashley? Okay.
So I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes as amended.
Okay, any discussion? Call to question those in favor, and that is carried. There's a comment.
Jason, like, since we can't see
Oh.
Kimberly, you're gonna have to let us know how she's voting and if she has something to say.
Pause while we see if
You can see her?
Councillor
I can
Hughes.
hear, yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Kim,
You
can you hear us, Kim?
so Councillor Hughes will be joining us via Zoom, so we're just checking to see if that system is working.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jason, if you can just let us know.
Yeah.
That's gonna be complicated. Okay. All right, delegations. All right. Yeah, if you can state your full name and address for the record, please.
Murray Broadhead, 2601 Pioneer Drive, Southwest Slave Lake.
Floor is yours.
I guess I'm here to talk to everybody about the offsite levies that are due on property east of my existing shops off of Caribou Trail on 2nd Avenue. When I entered the agreement, I did not really look into offsite levies, didn't know much about offsite levies at the time. And I started parking on the land and understand that anything to do with raw barren land requires a development permit. And then once you apply for a development permit, you are then required to pay any offsite levies. At that time, the town did not, I entered into an agreement to pay the offsite levies later after a time to be able to park on the land. Since then, I looked into it a little bit and asked a bunch of questions to a bunch of different people. And I'm wondering if I could go through a scenario and ask Lori what the outcome of a scenario that I have in my head and what the outcome of that would be. Would that be okay to ask that question right now?
Jeff,
Jeff would have to.
can Murray ask Lori a question?
I mean, yeah, given delegations, but then there's some. Lori will present first.
Okay. And I guess a scenario that I would like to go through before I ask the question is that properties prior to the inception of offsite levies in Slave Lake, and my understanding that offsite levies were brought in, I don't know the exact date. The offsite levies were brought into Slave Lake, but it was back in the 80s. Prior to that, the land that we're talking about was developed. There was a development permit. There was a business that run off of that land, Child's Homes. it's my understanding, I talked to Lori, she said that there were no offsite levies at that time. So they did not collect the offsite levies at that time because there was no such thing as offsite levies. So I bought the land and then the land was deemed raw barren land at that point in time, and then offsite levies were due. So in that case, any lands, any old shops prior to offsite levies in Slave Lake, if they were to say, put in a development permit for a fence on their land, and they built the shop prior to offsite levies, anything requires a development permit. I was required to have a development permit to park on the land. So a fence, a deck, anything to a land prior to offsite levies and the inception of offsite levies then would require offsite levies to be paid on that land. And I'm wondering why the land that I'm talking about with the previous development prior to offsite levies has offsite levies due. And maybe when you put a fence up on an old chunk of land prior to offsite levies, you will collect all offsite levies for any property pulling any development permit if there was no offsite levies at that time? That's a question.
So the way I'm understanding what you're saying is like there was already development on the property. So you would assume that you bought the property with something on it that it's grandfathered in, right? Is that what you're saying with this? That you don't think you should have to pay because there was a development on it?
There was an existing development. There was a development permit pulled on that property prior to me owning it. Child's Homes run a business off there. There was power run into that property. It was serviced. And I bought it. And there's offsite levies due on it, but I'm wondering why.
Okay, I'm good.
Counselor, wow.
Yeah, what was on there? Was it just a trailer or?
Child's Homes brought in, it was prior to my existence in Slave Lake. But my understanding, there was a sales rental of mobile homes, I believe, on that property. There was an office there and then probably a bunch of mobile homes on that property that he was selling and or renting inside of Slave Lake, which is a business.
Any further questions from council, Kurt?
I
Council
have a
Ferguson.
question for Mr. Broadhead. When did you start development or parking vehicles on there? What year roughly?
You'd have to ask Lori exactly, but it's got to be 8 years ago, probably.
Councilor Brandel?
Marie, when did you buy the land?
2006. Don't quote me on that.
Okay,
Yeah.
and when you bought it, usually like the realtors and the lawyers do their checks and like prepare you and let you know that the offsite levies are payable. Did you not find that out when you bought it?
I purchased it from the owner,
Did you use a lawyer to-
not through the lawyer. The lawyer didn't tell me anything, or I didn't use a realtor at the time.
So it's for sale by owner, not, and a realtor wasn't used, is what, okay.
Fair enough, but yeah, the lawyer should have caught it.
Yeah.
Counselor Adams?
You didn't buy that from Child's Homes, though. You bought that from another individual?
From him,
That was from him?
from Child's Homes, yeah. Norm Childs.
Okay.
Any further questions? Okay, so how it works right now is we have a few other reports to go through.
Okay.
And then so I think there's 4 reports, and then we will have our business arising from delegation. So Lori will present her report. You're welcome to stay for all of that if you would like. Just wanted to give you a heads up on how this works.
Okay, how long would that be, you think?
Estimate.
45 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was
about
gonna say
45.
Under an hour.
I'll stick around.
Okay, perfect. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're just gonna try and insert one solution here that might be able to show your live stream on the screen. Just give us 1 second. Maybe it doesn't.
Oh.
Did you have something there for a second?
Yeah. This is waiting for connection. Oh, there we go. Now we
Okay.
can see Counselor Hughes. Hello. Okay, then we're good to go, and we will continue with our next report on joint school site servicing. Counselor Ferguson,
I'm declaring a pecuniary interest in this matter.
okay, Counselor Brandel. And Counselor Adams.
Declaring a pecuniary. Oh, okay, interested in it.
Ashley, can you make sure you've noted the 3 counselors that have declared their pecuniary interest, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right,
Floor is
your
yours.
worship and members of council, the purpose of this report this evening is to bring additional information that was requested by council at the April 18th meeting. So I've given you the full report again later on in the report, and I don't have the agenda numbering. I inserted the additional information, so I'll just go over that for you. Construction costs, 2023 values. So the planning department contacted Jeff Feder, Associated Engineering, and requested the 2023 estimated cost to construct the infrastructure that's necessary to service the west end of the joint school site. Mr. Feder indicated that the cost today in 2023 dollars would be $3.6 million. As stated above, the total security in the body of the report, the total security we're holding for the school site is $2,582,348, resulting in a shortfall of $1,017,652 in security. This does not include the issue regarding an encumbrance being held in 3rd position on title, of which there, as well as the overdue offsite levies and charges, of which there is also no security for at this point. So I have a recommendation with respect to the shortfall in security based on the updated cost estimate and the shortfall of $1.017 million in security. Further, encumbrance 397 for $1 million registered in 3rd position on title. Those are both of concern and were addressed at the September 7th, 2021 meeting. Planning department is recommending the developers provide an irrevocable letter of credit in the amount of $2,017,652 to address both issues, the shortfall in the security and the 397 encumbrance registered in position 3 on title. With respect to the amending agreement, council also requested an amending agreement that was prepared for the extension request. It has been attached to this report. Please note, as stated above, the agreement is the same one that was utilized for the last extension agreement that was approved by council. Planning department is recommending utilizing this agreement for this particular extension request. The planning department would also like to state that revisiting the issue every 5 years is not desirable for the town or the developers. As there is much time and cost involved each time we do that. That said, pushing the time out without revisiting security being held or inflationary impacts to construction costs is very risky, and that is evidenced by our 2023 construction cost increase. with respect to this project. In 2007, when the original agreement was signed, it was expensive at that time to service the school site, and those costs have continued to increase over the last 16 years. This means the financial obligation is growing over time and it's not decreasing. In 2020, the developers advised that it was too costly to obtain the letter of credit to deal with the 397 encumbrance, the $1 million. They've also not paid and do not want to pay the offsite levies and Caribou collector charges, and they have requested the intersection charges be refunded in full. These statements and actions are of concern and certainly bring to mind that if it's too expensive to fulfill these obligations, how likely is it that they will default on the agreement? If the developers do default on the obligation, who is paying for the servicing of the school site? In accordance with the MGA, it is the municipality's responsibility to provide a school site when Alberta Education requires it. As such, if the developers default, the town will need to determine how the school school site will be serviced and how the town will fund the construction. And that will need to happen prior to Alberta Education requesting the site. The obligations under the development agreement have been delayed since 2007 or 16 years, and the costs keep rising. The planning department feels it is time to establish a final deadline for completion of the project to ensure the infrastructure gets built. So we're recommending council directs administration to send a letter to the developers advising that we will require an irrevocable letter of credit in the amount of $2,017,652 to deal with both the shortfall and the 397 encumbrance. The town will require the developers to pay immediately the outstanding offsite levies in the amount of $90,464.14 and the Caribou Collector Road levies or charges, in the amount of $454,380.06. And this is based on the 2023 updated values. The town will agree to grant a 5-year extension for the servicing of the west end of the joint school site to September 30th of 2028, after which time no further extensions would be granted. Servicing of the west end of the school site is to be completed no later than September 30th, 2028. And the developers would be responsible for all costs associated with preparation and registration of the required development agreement. Any questions?
Bring up the floor to questions. You have no questions?
No.
Ally?
We asked this before, but have they gotten back to us in regards? I know we've asked this before, but have they gotten back to us in regards to the offsite levies and the Caribou road charges? They said that, well, we didn't know if they were paid or not paid.
No, we reached out to them a couple of times and they indicated that those records were in storage and they have not been provided.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still not.
Still nothing, yeah.
Okay. Give everyone a minute.
I'm talking, no.
Lori, do we have any idea what the cost to service the west end of the joint school site would be for that September 30th, 2028?
Like how much more it will be?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to go and look at sort of an average of CPI adjustments. The last 3 years have been extremely high, so they wouldn't be the average kind of thing. We saw a 17% increase over 3 years.
Mhm.
So even if you said 10% over 5, which will probably be in the realm.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, I think it's safe to say costs are increasing, right? So the liability of the risk is
Yep.
really increasing.
Counselor Hughes will unmute you here shortly. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Should be good to, I can't hear you. Well, hold on 2 seconds. Try again.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Just get her to type it.
Can you type your question into the chat? Sorry about that. This is the instance of technology failure. She's typing, so hold on. This is a very lengthy list. She is typing at the moment. Okay. For Lori, just reading the documents from Legacy, they asked that the
tool recognize the existing
Existing.
2008 agreement as precedence.
Oh, okay, with the legacy is saying the 2008 agreement has precedence. When in 2008, it did, but each time the agreement expires and is replaced by a new development agreement, the old agreements are no longer binding. So the 2008 agreement expired in 2012 or 13, and at that point, it was no longer binding, and it's the new agreement that would take effect. So the most binding and current agreement we have is the one that was most recently entered into that expired 2 years ago.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, now we can.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Yeah, I did just have a question about that just because there is so much information to go through on this, and I've just been trying to really comb through, I think, their responses and sort of what, you know what I mean, what they are looking for. So yeah, that was my question. It was highlighted there. Our ask on issue 2, offsite levies and Caribou Collector road charges. The town recognized the existing 2008 development agreement has precedence over their extension condition and that the condition be removed. So Lori, you're just stating that that already doesn't have precedence because the agreement was already renegotiated since 2008?
Yes, that's correct. There's been 2 other versions of agreement since then. Essentially, when that first agreement was put in place in 2008, they had security put up for the offsite levies and the Caribou Collector charges. And then when we reviewed security, I'm not sure of the exact date, but one of the following agreements, they didn't have enough security to cover the offsite levies and the development charges, Caribou road charges, sorry. And council passed a motion at that time to adopt the new agreement subject to the offsite levies and the Caribou Collector road levies being paid because they no longer had security to defer them. And then that new agreement came into effect.
Okay. Can you speak to the model, I would say, or as they call it, the long-standing principle, development pays for development? Because in their words, they're saying the levies and collector road contributions are due as each lot sells based on the per hectare formula.
Sorry, I didn't get the last, I didn't understand anything after development pays for development.
Yes, because just to one of their comments as well, they're saying the levies and collector road contributions are due as each lot sells based on the per hectare formula, kind of going to the principle that development pays for development, and this allows it to be affordable. Can you speak to that? And I guess what other, development models we have done the same or have not done the same?
Okay, yes, we have done this many times for other developers, and essentially what it is a deferral. Rather than requiring the offsite levies and development charges to be paid at the subdivision stage, the developer requests council to consider deferring it to the time. There will be a number of triggering events. Either there is a timeline or when property sells, usually is the drop dead date. But in order to defer that and not pay it at the subdivision stage, they have to provide security equivalent to 100% of the value of those levies that they're deferring. And soon as the security cannot be provided any longer, then the deferral stops and the requirement to pay is triggered immediately, which is exactly what happened in one of their agreements back in 2013 or 15. I'd have to look at the history. When we did a review of the security and there was insufficient security to cover those charges. So it's not unusual, and council has approved this arrangement in the past for a number of other developers, but the security has to be in place to allow the deferral.
In this scenario, would we be able to request that the security be in place and then revert back to that model of development paying for development? Like,
Well, that is development paying for development, right? That is the model of the development pay. Basically, the idea is that when the development comes on stream, a new subdivision, it puts pressure on existing infrastructure and requires roads and things to be built. So when the developer is paying based on area or number, their proportionate share, that is the development pays for development scenario. Does that make sense?
If that's what they're asking for, how does that differ from this motion presented?
I think that the confusion there is that when the agreement was initially approved for them back in 2008, they had security for the deferral. And then since then, they haven't been able to provide the security. And they would like to be able to revert back to that 2008 decision. But the reality is that they don't have the security for it anymore. So they can't go back to it. And our policy states, our development standards policy, and we have a couple others, deferral of offsite levies and charges can only be done if there's 100% security to guarantee that those levies and charges will be paid. And since they can't provide the security, then it triggers the requirement to pay.
And I think too, they're now, their development pays for development. They want to see the actual development of the school being built, right? That's their interpretation of the development pays for development, where.
Okay, yeah, and unfortunately, we don't, I don't control that. Obviously, it's Alberta Education that will drive that, and we don't know when that's going to be. And they don't always give you, in discussions with the High Prairie School Division, where they're finding out about the 2-year lead time from Alberta Education as to, when they're saying, okay, we're going to build a new school and they're ramping up. So it's not like we have typically 10 or 15 years notice.
No, and these costs could double or triple by the,
Yes.
anyway, right? It's just going to keep going upward.
Absolutely.
Counselor Hughes?
Yeah,
I apologize. Some of your sentences are really blurring into one. I'm really getting a lot of feedback, so I think it may have been hard for me to hear Mayor Ward's question and whatnot. I guess I am just curious here. So it sounds like, our overarching option that we do want to possibly strive for would be just the issue of getting the proper security that we want for today, correct?
I'm suggesting a couple of things. One, we need to get the proper security. If there is a motion that stands already with respect to the Caribou Collector road charges and levies that they're to be paid. Like there's a couple of motions now with respect to that. So those need to be paid. And the other thing I'm recommending that council consider is that I think that we need to give the developers an end date to when we expect construction to commence, and that to advise that no more extensions after 5 years or whatever council deems appropriate will be considered, because we just keep pushing.
Kick it down the road.
We just keep kicking it down the road and the costs keep escalating, and it's becoming further and further out of reach. And as such, it's increasing the risk that there will be a default, there could be a default in the agreement, and we won't get the servicing to the school site completed, and then we'll be in the situation of trying to determine how we're going to fund that and how we're going to make that happen.
Okay.
Just waiting to see if there's anyone else.
I think he's up there. We could make a motion.
You can, yep.
Ali, you have any more questions? Okay, I would make a motion. I'll move that administration send a letter to the developers advising of the following. The town will require the developers to provide an irrevocable letter of credit in the amount of $2,017,652, representing the shortfall in security of $1,017,652 as a result of the 2023 construction cost estimates, and replace the 397 encumbrance, i.e. $1 million. The town will require the developers to pay immediately the outstanding offsite levies in the amount of $90,464.14 and the Caribou Collector road charges in the amount of $454,380.06, based on the updated 2023 values. The town will agree to grant the 5-year extension for the servicing of the west end of the joint school site in September 30th, 2028, after which time no further extensions will be granted. The servicing of the west end of the joint school site is to be completed no later than September 30th, 2028. The developers will be responsible for all costs associated with the preparation and resignation of the required development agreement. Bill.
Okay, there is a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Okay, call to question those in favor. And that is carried.
Thank you.
Less
Thank you,
words,
Lori.
Lori, less words in your motions. Just kidding.
That was a whole paragraph and a half there.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go with our payment feature credit card report. Roland.
Good evening, your worship and members of council. So the purpose of,
Oh,
Oh.
geez.
Forget about them.
You, Jeffrey. Thank you, Ashley. Now you may proceed.
so this is just to advise council of adding the credit card payment feature at our main office. So background, we're all aware that the town office currently does not accept credit card payments. We do accept cash, debit, and checks at this time for utilities and taxes. We did explore this option a few years ago. It was never approved by council. We did then at that time set up Simply Pay, which is a third-party vendor to accept credit cards. However, it's limited in use as it's really an online option only. So I did reach out to Moneris to look into setting up the credit card option at the town office. The process to them is fairly simple. I can submit 2 years of past financial statements and get that kind of set up. The fees structure was a little bit more complex. Moneris itself charges 0.65% per transaction to charge credit cards. However, the card itself is what's going to determine a different charge. So depending on what type of card you have, the ranges that they gave was 0.5% to 4% per transaction cost on top of the 0.65% that Moneris charges. And I did get some update today with some of the legal stuff. I'll kind of talk about that in a little bit. We did reach out to other municipalities such as Westlock, Mornville, Athabasca, High Prairie, and the city of Edmonton. They do allow for the use of a credit card for varying different transactions, depending on the place. Some take it for receivables only, some take it for utilities only. In no instance did I find that anyone allowed for you to pay your taxes with a credit card fee. They simply just said that the transaction costs were too substantial. And talking about Westlock mainly, their main use for credit card is through Option Pay, which again is basically similar to what we use Simply Pay for the bulk of their credit card transactions. So the last couple of pieces that we are looking into is just the payment card security, what the town needed to have on our end to make sure that the transaction was secure. So reaching out to legal or hearing back from them today, basically where we're at this process is just getting a review of our FOIP policy to make sure that we have the proper guidelines built in there to that handle the credit card information on our end. And then just a review of kind of our procedures and policies on how we're going to handle the information that we collect to process credit cards. And we can go from there. So then it comes down to how do we want to pay for the service fees for people using credit cards at the town office? Looking at what we could actually charge a customer. A reasonable fee that was given was about 1.5%. So there is some risk depending on the type of card that the card fee itself will be higher than what we can recover. I'm allowed to use an average of the fees that are incurred. And so, as this will be our first kick at the can, You know, those fees could vary and we can take a look at that after the fact. We also have to, you know, we just have to amend our fees and rates bylaw to include the service charge in there so that we have the legal authority to charge that. But other than that, we can go that route, or if we don't want to, the town can also just eat all of the costs for the transactions, and then we can deal with that at budget time to increase an amount for credit card transactions. That's kind of where we're at in the process.
Counselor Adams.
But just looking at me,
I looked the whole way.
Didn't look right.
these we're kind of in two portions, right? One, we're talking utilities and then the other, we're talking taxes with this.
This would be like, we would entertain every type of payment at the town office other than taxes. So if you wanted to pay your utility bill, that would be an option. If you want to pay, accounts receivable bill, like an invoice that we've sent you.
Not the costs then of whatever the payment structure ends up being for credit cards be added on to a credit to what our overall operational costs are for utilities, and that gets passed on to users, and in which case it gets funded that way so that the town's not out of pocket overall.
Like as in adding, one option is just to increase fees everywhere by, let's say, 1.5%. Problem with that is we increase fees for every single person. Every person, even people who aren't paying with credit cards. We could build it into the rates, but I can't, without actually having a separate per card transaction.
Well, you take your yearly amount and it would kind of fluctuate, but it'd be a year trailing in what you're doing.
Yeah, on the whole though, right? So if
Yeah.
we increased our rates, let's say 2% or 1.5%, that means every single person who pays their bill pays 2% extra to cover the cost of maybe,
But in which
I don't know,
case-
1,000 people who are using a credit card, right?
And as it stands right now, how much are we in default in utilities, for example,
In
in a
default,
year? Yeah, that gets transferred over to property taxes.
I believe last year was about 65 to 70,000. At any one given time, we're about between 20 and 60,000 and
Probably $60,000 in default.
But that's just, that has nothing to do with
No, I just wonder if it would help with. cost.
assist. Generally, I've heard from other places that, it helps a bit. It's not going to solve all of the problems, but it definitely alleviates some of the collection problems when people are just flipping it onto their credit card. So definitely for us, it's a non-issue in that regard.
And it's a really hard thing for us to measure exactly how many people would adopt the credit card usage in order to
Correct,
account for
yeah.
this 1.5 to 2% that you're.
I've gotten anywhere from 15 to 45,000 was kind of the rough estimates that other places were paying for in fees.
So then that wouldn't account for 1.5% increase to utility charge.
1.5% increase to utilities is definitely greater than that.
Counselor Brandel.
So Roland, last time this report came to us, we were told that we weren't allowed to charge a fee, but now we can.
Correct. So there was, I don't have the actual legal thing. So before, you were not allowed to charge. I don't know, there was a big TELUS lawsuit that went through that allowed the vendor or the merchant to charge a fee. And in that instance, they came up with a reasonable rate that TELUS was allowed to charge for credit cards. But prior to that, it was our understanding that we're told that we are not allowed to recoup that cost. And the Visa and MasterCard, there's a service agreement that you have with that, or with us would be with Moneris. They do not want the merchant making a profit off of the fee.
Right. Okay, and then the 1.5 to 2%, is that just like what other communities are doing, best practices, or?
That was a reasonable amount that we kind of collected. So I have no data on exactly what our fees are going to be depending on that, but that was the ballpark
But
given.
theoretically, we could charge whatever we wanted to.
Up to, well, there's a maximum limit of
Fair.
2.4%. That's on the legislation. Yes.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Who's first?
Oh, you could go.
Counselor Ferguson.
I'll let you go first. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
I
I'll get
just,
back to you.
I mean, it'd be great if we could pay by credit card, so we'd give people more options to pay. But unless we're just dinging that single credit card user, I'm not a fan of everyone paying 2 to 4% more to carry the load of everyone else. That's my 2 cents.
Counselor Adams.
So my understanding is if we're going to charge that 1.5 to 2.4%, that is on a per transaction basis. So whether they sign up for auto monthly off their credit cards, if they're just like TELUS, if you're on there, they charge you 1.5% in addition to your bill.
Yes. That's the model that we are looking at, just to be able to recoup the costs on a, for the people
Who's
who are
using
actually
it?
using that feature.
Okay, so if you use your
Okay.
credit card, you get the 1.5 to 2%.
Yeah.
But if you pay by other means like direct debit from your bank or stuff
Correct.
like that.
Yeah,
then-
we're not going to charge on that. There's just simply to recoup the credit card cost so that it's to keep it in line.
So from Counselor Hughes, she says, when she made this motion, she simply wanted businesses to have the ability to pay for development permits and utilities with a credit card for ease of use. She definitely didn't want to see this used for tax purposes, and that she also agrees with Sean's statement.
Thank you. Our workaround means of technology. I would agree with Counselor Hughes and Counselor Grumlich on this as well, that if it lines up that you are choosing to use that method because of convenience or points or whatever, great. I also do like the added benefit that it may improve some of our collections. I just think most people wouldn't choose to pay 1 to 2% extra on your property.
Right.
Property tax assessment.
So we're not there yet, but we'll be there pretty soon. So we're going to kind of recommend like a maximum limit between $1,000 and $1,500 that we would allow per transaction.
Would that cover the majority of development permits?
yeah,
Yeah,
I
I think,
would
because I
say
think
yes.
that was the intention. I can't see Counselor Hughes's face right now, but I think that was the intention, was to be able to cover the majority of development permits. I think there was some instances with business owners or whatever with development permits and having to get cash, and it was just no one ever steps foot into a bank anymore. So just to alleviate some of those concerns there. Remember your question?
All my comments have been kind of spoken for. It's just if you can make it a user pay model and it's not put on the general tax base, then I agree with that. If somebody's okay with paying the extra 2% on themselves personally, then I don't have an issue with it.
And Roland, there might be a marginal discrepancy at the end where we are paying some of that.
Correct, yeah.
So that's something to think of.
Counselor Adams.
Well, in coming up with that fee structure, we would just make sure we have credit cards usable that are not going to exceed that pay structure, like not accepting American Express at 4%.
Correct. Yeah, we were looking at right at this point in time, it would be like Visa, MasterCard is the
Right.
two cards that we were looking at.
And as far as going exceeding where you're wanting to do a limit of $1,500, I'm just wondering, why does it matter if the person's willing to pay the extra 2% on it if he wants to put it on $12,000? Is there?
I think for maybe for the first year for a trial run, we can put a cap, gather some data on the actual fees so that we're not in a place where it's like, oh, we thought it was going to be 10 grand and it turned out to be 30 grand or 40 grand.
I see.
Just to get the data collected, and then we can revisit that in a future thing. I just talking with other places, usually like, because even with Pay Simply, there's no cap on what you can do for the town, right? But I think it's like 2 grand, it's like $240 extra.
You're basically looking at minimizing risk with the cap for the first year, right? Is that
Yes.
what I'm gathering?
Yeah.
Counselor Moellem?
No, I just want to say that I like that you pay for the convenience. I do that with my vendors in my restaurant as well. With my vendors, I could choose to pay with a credit card, and I do get the fee, and I'm fine with that. But I'm glad that not everyone has to pay for that.
Counselor Adams?
Motion to accept this report as information.
I have a question before I ask, well, I guess I'm at further discussion. I have further discussion. So with that report being accepted as information, are we expecting something to come back?
Yes.
Okay, so that'll just end up on
Targeting
the
June to
management.
bring a follow-up report with all the, because I have to get the review of our FOIP policy and a couple other things kind of
Okay,
taken
so
care
that
of.
just stays on our management task list then?
Yeah, it
Okay.
can. It's the same topic.
Perfect. There's
So are we going to be communicating this to the public, and how will we be doing that?
Yeah, we will have a plan to roll out once we get all the final pieces and
So there's a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? All the question, those in favor? And that is carried. All right, audited financial statements.
perfect. Come on up. All right, so carrying on audited financial statements, I have with me, our auditor, from Doyle and Company, Edward. So I will let him, kind of go over his, piece here and then I can dig into the report.
Good. Thank you, your worship and members of council. My name is Edward. I'm a partner at Doyle and Company Chartered Professional Accountants. We're the external auditors for the town of Slave Lake. So we prepared the audit report for everybody to review today. Just wanted to start off saying we've issued a clean, unqualified audit opinion. So as an external auditor, we're independent from council from the town of Slave Lake. We're a firm in Edmonton. We gather audit evidence and we provide our opinion. So for December 31st, 2022, like I mentioned before, we issued a clean, unqualified audit opinion. We found no instances of fraud. We have no disagreements with management or mayor or council. Everything was good. Internal controls were strong at the town of Slave Lake. We couldn't find anything that surpassed our materiality level. And everything was good. You know, we want to say a thank you to finance, to administration, and to members of council for all their help in preparing this audit. It was submitted to municipal affairs on time. Yeah. And Roland's going to go through more the numbers of the financial statement. But any questions to the audit process or anything at this time?
Questions? Okay, continue on, Roland.
Perfect. So as part of the MGA Act, each municipality must prepare annual financial statements of the municipality in the immediate preceding year in accordance with GAAP and public sector accounting practices. And so the town has done that. In addition to that, we also prepare a financial information return. And that financial information return is a document that is used by the province. It is based on the numbers that are in the financial statement that has also been prepared and submitted. For the financial statements themselves, administration prepares the annual financial statements on an accrual basis with an adherence to GAAP. The statements are prepared in-house, meaning that myself and my team prepare all the numbers, prepare the financial statements, make all of the notes, and the auditing firm takes a look at what we have done and does their process to come to their conclusion. The financial statements are prepared on a consolidated basis. All of the different departments and cost centers are grouped together and shown as a single audit entity. The report I have here focuses on three key parts of the financial statements. The consolidated statement of financial position, also referred to as the balance sheet, the consolidated statement of income, and the schedule of changes in accumulated surplus. So when we start with the statement of changes in financial position, the town ended the year with cash and temporary investment balance of $9.9 million. This is a slight decrease from the prior year of about $340,000. Cash consists of cash in bank accounts as well as cash on hand. Accounts receivable ended the year at $4 million, down from the prior year from $4.8 million. Major receivables for the year are CCBF at $1.1 million, also known as the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly known as GTF or the Gas Tax Fund. We had $500,000 receivable from the Canada Community Revitalization Fund for the downtown project. And MD of Lesser Slave River payments for the intermunicipal and fire services agreement at $560,000. The remaining grant for the sewage lagoon project was receivable from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for $250,000. And the remainder is annual amounts from Big Fish Bay franchise revenue and government center costs. Taxes and grants in lieu of receivable was $1.1 million with an allowance for doubtful accounts of $498,000, leaving a net receivable balance of $694,000. Long-term investments increased to $11.6 million from interest accrued on investments. Long-term investments held by the town include 12 financial instruments such as GICs and provincial bonds. Accounts payable ended the year at $2.5 million, up from $1.8 million in 2021. Significant payables at the end of the year include payment for RCMP services and AMSC payments for utilities. There was also an increase in the holdbacks payable for capital projects of $360,000. Also included within the payables amount set up in the previous years is amounts payable for the RCMP retro pay for the costs that they had given us. Employee obligations include outstanding accrued overtime and employee vacation at the end of the year, and that increased by $43,000, leaving a balance of $306,000 for the year. Deposit liabilities includes deposits held on utility accounts at $196,000 and planning and development deposits of $145,000. Deferred revenue ended the year with a balance of $4.6 million. This includes a number of provincial and federal grants, including the Municipal Sustainability Initiative Grant, or MSI, the Canada Community Building Fund Grant, a Fire Smart Grant revenue, and the Canada Community Revitalization Fund Grant. Just a note here is deferred revenue is a liability in the town's statement of financial position that represents a prepayment of grants or other revenue for expenses or capital that have yet to be purchased or incurred. Deferred revenue is recognized as earned revenue in the statement of income as the services provided or the capital project is acquired or built. Long-term debt ended the year at $23.3 million. It includes amount for 8 debentures for capital projects. The largest debenture remaining is $11.6 million, which is for the government center, which is supported wholly by provincial lease payments. $244,000 is for a capital lease for fire services equipment. And the debt limit available to the town stood at $23.3 million, which represents the additional amount the town is legally allowed to borrow. If we move on to the consolidated statement of income, net municipal taxes for the year stood at $9.6 million. This includes the net taxes collected for the municipality with respect to requisitions collected on behalf of the province or seniors. Included here is $139,000 recognized from a reversal of amounts set up as doubtful in past years that has been collected. User fees and sale of goods ended the year at $5.6 million. These items include things such as utility fees, cemetery fees, recreation fees, and fire services fees. Interest income ended the year at $253,000, which represents interest earned from investments and cash in the bank. Government transfers for operating ended the year at $2.5 million, which includes the items such as police wage grants, FCSS funding, as well as recognition of Fire Smart grant funding, MSI funding for the library, and also MD of Lesser Slave River intermunicipal and fire service payments. Licenses and permits ended the year with $109,000. This mainly includes business license fees and development permits. Fines ended the year at $292,000, and they account for police fines, community enforcement fines, and photo radar fines. Photo radar fines for the year were much lower than budgeted. And as a result, there was also a lower reserve transfer for the year. Net photo radar funds amounted to $80,000, and that was transferred to reserves. Just a note there, in prior years, this amount has hovered around 120 to 130,000. Franchise and concession contracts ended the year with $1.4 million, and this is for the ATCO franchise fees for power and gas that the town receives. Rental income ended the year at $3.1 million. It is primarily generated from the provincial government agreements. Other rental income included in here includes recreational rental fees for the pool and the MRC facility. Other revenue ended the year at $349,000. Components of other revenue are management fees for overseeing the Wildfire Legacy Center in the amount of $204,000. Insurance recoveries for Barton Park amounted to $80,000. Contributions and donations amounted to $24,000, and there are other amounts that totaled $41,000. On the expense side, council and other legislative encompasses council and its services, ended the year at $305,000. Administration ended the year at $2.6 million, and this includes all of general administration such as human resources, health and safety, finance, information technology, and the CAO. Bylaw enforcement ended the year at $401,000, includes community enforcement and animal control costs. Policing costs for the year ended at $2.1 million. Fire includes the fire services operations, search and rescue operations, dangerous goods, and Fire Smart, and it ended the year at $1.6 million. Transportation costs for the year were $2.1 million, and this includes items such as roads, streets, walks, lighting, and airport service payments. Water supply and distribution ended the year at $1.3 million, and this includes our entire water supply chain from the pumping of raw water through to the treatment process and on to the end delivery to the user. Wastewater treatment ended the year at $904,000, and which includes the entire cost system for the treatment process, as well as pipes in the ground, lift stations that carry the waste. Waste management ended the year at $659,000 and includes all of the costs for garbage pickup, garbage disposal, garbage recycling, including the recycling drop-off center. FCSS, our Family and Community Support Program, ended the year at $236,000. Cemetery costs, which include costs to maintain both the new and the old cemetery, ended the year at $18,000. Subdivision planning, land and development, which includes the planning and development department, land development, and our economic development programs, ended the year at $458,000. Commercial properties, which includes expenses for the government center, ended the year at $1.5 million. Parks, recreation, and culture includes community services such as the multi-rec center, park, sports field, and the pool, ended the year at $2.6 million. And the final item we had on there was amortization, which includes all of the amortization for the town's depreciating assets, ended the year at $5.6 million. So the total expenses for the year, including amortization, amounted to $23.3 million, and total revenues before expenses, before other items, I'm sorry, in the year amounted to an excess of revenue or expenses of $186,000. Sorry. 77. Right. Other items that show up on the statement is government transfers for capital. So that ended the year at $4 million. These include federal, provincial, and MD of Lesser Slave River amounts for capital projects. Grants recognized include MSI funding, CCBF, Canada Community Building Fund funding, MSP funding, and GMF or Green Municipal funding. Gains on disposal of assets ended at $324,000, and this includes amounts from a vehicle trade-in and the sale of the old fire hall. Contributed assets. So this is a large one for the year. We had a $17 million contributed assets. So this represents a transfer for the MD of Lesser Slave River for the raw water line project. This project was mainly funded from the province of Alberta through recovery funding. The MD of Lesser Slave River was the original recipient of the funds, as well as the cost for the bulk of the project. Now that the project has been completed and is in use, ownership of the asset has been transferred to the town. And so we recognize the costs that they had on their end over onto ours. Moving on to the schedule of changes in accumulated surplus. The town had a beginning balance in its unrestricted surplus of $2.5 million, restricted surplus of $14.4 million, and an equity intangible capital asset balance of $129 million, for a total beginning accumulated surplus of $146 million. Excess revenue over expenditures, which includes operating revenue and expenditures, as well as capital revenue, but not capital purchases, resulted in net revenues of $21.6 million. We transferred $6.3 million to our reserves. As per council motion made on July 12, 2022, $2.3 million was transferred from unrestricted surplus to varying reserves. Fire hall proceeds were transferred to the capital reserve for $950,000. $204,000 was transferred from DRP funding received by the town in prior year claims that were paid out of reserves for rain and flooding events in the past. And the remaining reserve transfers were as per budget allocations. Transfers from reserves amounted to $56,000, and this represents transfers to the Economic Development Program. Reserves used for capital projects amounted to $2.7 million. Government transfers for capital amounted to $4 million and were used to fund the capital additions. There was a total of $6.7 million additions to purchase capital assets, as well as $17 million transfers for the raw waterline project from the MD of Lesser Slave River, for a total of $23.8 million in capital additions. There was a total of $643,000 in net asset disposals for the year, and $458,000 worth of projects were moved from work in progress to active depreciating assets. Long-term debt repaid of $2.2 million consisted of the principal portion of the debt repayments in the year. And so when we look on a whole, of the $2.4 million in the beginning unrestricted surplus, 2.3 of that was transferred to reserves, leaving $100,000 in our unrestricted surplus for the year. Operations for the year saw an increase of $553,000 to our unrestricted surplus, leaving us a final balance of $653,000 for the year. The net effect to our unrestricted surplus for the year resulted in a decrease of $1.8 million and an increase of $3.5 million to the restricted surplus. After the additions to capital, amortization, and changes in debt repaid, the net effect on our equity and tangible capital assets was an increase of $19.9 million, leaving a final balance of $149 million. And the total accumulated surplus for the year ended at $167 million, an increase of $21.6 million. Some of the highlights for the year: capital additions. So major capital additions in the year included the Third Street Road project, Sawridge Creek new water transmission line, the new sea lift force main pipeline, part of the downtown revitalization project, the spray park in Hilda Eben, Smaller projects include town office renovations, an electrical vehicle charging station, pickup truck purchases, sidewalk rehabilitation, drainage system upgrades, bulk sewer dumping station grinders, pool deck resurfacing, as well as minor additions to park and equipment for the MRC. The debt limit for the town stood at 23.3 million with annual debt servicing limits at $4.6 million. So the town really ended the year with a fairly healthy debt limit. The 23 million is what we can borrow on top of what we've already borrowed. So we do have a fairly healthy pool of borrowing capacity should the town need to do so. And so at the bottom here, I've just kind of had the highlights for everybody. So operations for the year resulted in a 553,000 increase to the unrestricted surplus. We'll be bringing a report to council at a future meeting to discuss how to allocate some of this unrestricted surplus amounts. Our reserves during the year, 6.4 million was transferred and 2.8 was drawn. The net effect on our reserve balance was an increase of reserves by 3.5 million, leaving a final balance of $17.9 million. And our outstanding debt for the year, already kind of covered that, but we started the year with $25.5 million owing and ended with 23.3. Also included, as Edward already gone over, is the opinion from the auditor. And with that, is there any questions?
Since you're waiting for me anyway. I just got a couple questions as far as understanding for the general public and for myself. Under your accounts receivable part of the report, you've also got in there taxes and grants in loop. I would just like to get clarification on doubtful debt accounts. And exactly if you could explain how that impacts what we're doing, how that impacts receivables and what that means to the general public overall as far as the taxpayer goes.
So we have $1 million owing in taxes. Of that, we've recognized that 498,000 is likely uncollectible. And so we're saying 694,000, got my math right, is just owing at the end of the year that we're still likely to collect. So on a year-to-year basis, I think we bounce between $400,000 and $600,000. And so these would be amounts that are owing for 2022 that are still, or 2021, sorry, that are still receivable in the year. And so normally over the course of the year, these will get paid up, or these are properties that will, if they go into default, then
So if we're expecting them to get paid off, they stay inside receivables?
Yes.
And then if we're not, they go into the doubtful. And then hopefully we get it at some point, but we basically write it off this year. How does that work?
Yeah, we've set it up as doubtful as in it has been, but we're still pursuing avenues where we might collect on some of that. So that further up there, so we had set up the another amount for 190,000, 120,000 that was set up as doubtful that we did collect on, and we were able to recognize that this year.
So that was like disposal of land and we collected from that?
It was to do with some parcels of land that we originally thought we weren't gonna be able to deal with, and that went through, so.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councilor Ferguson.
So in a municipality, there's a balance between taxing too much, taxing not enough. You want to have the, the right surplus at the end of the year. So I noticed we had a fairly large surplus of about $550,000. Just, for knowledge for the public, what is the reasoning for such a large surplus this year?
So the surplus is mainly a result of vacant positions. So the town set out its budget and said we are going to hire X amount of people to accomplish our tasks. We've had, probably not unknown, ever since COVID, we've had staffing issues, trying to retain staff, trying to hire staff. Those issues persisted last year, still throughout the year, which gave us the bulk of the substantial, I guess, savings, or we were unable to spend that money, just simply that we couldn't hire the people.
Thank you for that clarification.
Counselor Roundel.
I will make a motion.
Okay.
Be it resolved that council adopt the financial statements and the financial information return for the year ending December 31st, 2022.
There is a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? All right, can I call to question those in favor? And that is carried. Thanks, Kim. Had to wait for the video hand up there. Okay. Moving on, Town of Slave Lake. Thank you. Town of Slave Lake Emergency Management Bylaw.
Good evening. So the purpose of this report is to present proposed changes to the Town of Slave Lake Emergency Management Bylaw and to appoint the Town of Slave Lake CAO to be the Director of Emergency Management for the Town of Slave Lake. The updated Emergency Management Bylaw builds on the existing bylaw by appointing the CAO as the Director of Emergency Management. The current Emergency Management Bylaw was updated in 2013. The new bylaw appoints the Town of Slave Lake Chief Administrative Officer to be the Director of Emergency Management for the town. The new bylaw also allows for any of the listed members of the agency to be appointed to the position of Deputy Director of Emergency Management, so the Deputy DEM. The new bylaw will authorize administration to pay salary staff personnel per our overtime policy in the event of an emergency. Options before council are to continue use of the 2013 Emergency Management Bylaw, or number two, to approve the new 2023 Emergency Management Bylaw as presented.
I have a question. Before the bylaw from 2013, who was the Director of Emergency Management in that one? Was that
I
just-
believe you had it listed as the CAO, but it's kind of altered between the CAO and the fire chief, and it's kind of alternated back and forth. Most cases, it typically is your CAO that occupies that position, whereas the fire chief or depending on the nature of the disaster that's being addressed, kind of fulfills the role of an operations sort of basically looking after the response to the incident, depending on the nature of the incident. So if there was a fire, typically a fire chief or deputy fire chief would be responsible for planning and coordinating that sort of response to that. If it was a flood, you might find a position like our operations director might fulfill that sort of role, leading that response and directing resources. So it places the administration of the director in the DEM role typically with the CAO, and this just kind of clarifies and cleans up a little bit of that bylaw with some recommendations from AEMA as well built in.
Great. Councilor Brandel.
I will move that council give first reading to bylaw 12 to 2023 emergency management.
Okay, any further discussion? Call to question those in favor. And that is carried. Councilor Gramlich.
Move that council give second reading to bylaw number 12-2023 emergency management.
Any further discussion? Call to question those in favor. And that is carried. Councilor Ferguson.
Just point of procedure, since we're doing 3 readings, don't we need unanimous?
Correct. I
consent?
believe there's a motion missed from the report there. So you need the third motion, but unanimously.
Okay, I will move that we give unanimous consent to proceed into 3rd reading for bylaw number 1223 emergency management.
Thanks for that catch. Any discussion? Call to question those in favor. And that is carried. And Councilor Gramlich.
Move that council gives third reading to bylaw number 12-2023 emergency management.
Any discussion? Call to question those in favor. And that is carried. Okay, before we move into our business arising from delegations, I have a request for a 5-minute break, please. Thank you.
Declined.
Declined. Wasn't my request.
Oh, I thought it was Steve's. Okay.
We're back on? Perfect. All right. Business record from delegations. Lori.
Okay. On the information brought forward by Mr. Broadhead. So the applicant Murray Broadhead has made 8 requests of council since 2011 to consider waiving or deferring offsite levies or some other creative options such as land swaps and the construction of Second Ave Northwest in lieu of payment of levies and so on. Each of these requests required thorough consideration of the request, a review of applicable bylaws, provincial legislation, potential risk analysis, options for council's consideration, etc. Further to these requests have been ongoing illegal development issues that have occurred on the site since prior to 2011. These enforcement issues consisted of stockpiles of concrete and construction debris, storage yard, bunkhouses, Quonsets, recreational vehicles that were being lived in, etc., all of which occurred on the site without a development permit. Through the course of enforcement, Mr. Broadhead would be notified that he required a development permit and that upon application for that development permit, he would be required to pay offsite levies and road contributions. It should be noted that many in the enforcement matters required several letters and multiple site visits to conclude the matters, and that more often than not, we were actively dealing with at least one enforcement annually. Finally, in 2017, the town entered into a development agreement with Mr. Broadhead, giving him 5 years to pay the offsite levies with a deadline of no later than February 28th, 2022. Mr. Broadhead was also required to provide security in the form of an encumbrance that was registered on the title of the lands. There are a few options available. Council could require Mr. Broadhead to pay the offsite levies immediately as per the development agreement dated May 5th, 2017. We could agree to renegotiate another development agreement, agreeing to a further time extension to pay offsite levies, or council could waive the offsite levies. The planning department has spent hours upon hours on this matter with respect to the many options explored and reports that have been written with respect to the offsite levies, as well as extensive time spent on enforcement. It is now May 2023, and as such, Mr. Broadhead was afforded an extra 14 months to pay beyond the February 28th, 2022 deadline, as outlined in his agreement. The matter of payment of the offsite levies and illegal developments on the subject lands has been ongoing since prior to 2011. However, the history prior to 2011 was lost in the fire. Mr. Broadhead signed an agreement and is contractually obligated to pay the offsite levies. He's been well aware of this obligation to pay for at least 13 years and has been afforded an extensive amount of time to pay them. The planning department feels no further resources or time should be expended on the matter. We have a binding agreement requiring him to pay, and why should we consider extending that timeline or waiving or deferring the levies now? We can finally conclude the matter, and as such, the planning department is recommending the council proceed with option 1 and require a direct administration to send a letter to Mr. Broadhead advising in writing that the offsite levies of $285,363 are due immediately. And failure to provide them would result in the town pursuing legal action under default sections of the development agreement dated May 15, 2017. Questions?
Okay, there's a lot there. There's a lot of stuff. I want to ignore all the stuff for a bit and go back to what Murray was talking about with Chili's Homes being there. Can you explain it to me? Like I'm real, like a 6-year-old for real. Like where did it come in? How come there was no, how come we didn't collect from them if there was someone there?
So Child's Homes, I don't know exactly when they entered on the site, but I do know that they were operating in the 1970s and 80s on the property. I don't know exactly when, and of course, we don't have any historical data. I just know that they've been there that long. We didn't put our first offsite levy bylaw in place until I believe it was October of 1985. So when a development permit would have been issued for Child's Homes to operate in the 70s or whenever they started, offsite levies were not even a thing at that time. We didn't even have a bylaw. So we wouldn't be asking him or anybody else that would be applying for a permit all the way up to 1985 to pay for an offsite levy because they didn't exist. So based on that timeline, it's easy to conclude that offsite levies weren't paid because the offsite levy bill wasn't even in place at the time.
Okay, so then at some point, and Murray bought it off this guy, he said.
Yep.
So like, was it triggered? Were the offsite levies in place before Murray bought it or after? Like when he bought it,
After, see, the offsite levy bylaw came in place in 1985, and I think he said he bought it in 2006 or 7.
okay,
So offsite levies had been in place for however many years, many
So,
years.
like this is where I
previous
have,
to that.
should we not have went after?
Offsite levies are not triggered until somebody applies for a development permit. So you can sit on a vacant piece of land and offsite levies haven't been paid. But we can't come and ask you for payment of those levies until you apply for subdivision
So,
or development. So
Joe,
that triggers it,
Okay.
even though they haven't been paid, it's not like it's an outstanding or an obligation owed until they apply. The triggering event has to happen for us to ask for it. So that's why when development started to occur on the site and we would do enforcement and we'd get a hold of them and we'd say, hey, you know, we noticed you're doing this on the site, you need a development permit. And by the way, when you apply, you're gonna have to pay your offsite levies because they haven't been paid. And the submission of the development permit is the triggering event. And hence why so many requests and options going back and forth, because some of the developments he was proposing, he didn't want to pay the large sum of offsite levies to be triggered
Yeah.
for that development. So we even looked at many of the options we looked at considered, maybe subdividing an acre parcel off so that only the offsite levies would be triggered for that 1 acre and not the remainder. So we looked at all kinds of potential solutions and options, and this is Mr. Broadhead's land. So of course, those options and solutions needed to work for him, and many of the solutions and options we came up with did not. Security options that didn't work for him, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of reports, lots of negotiation, lots of going back and forth. The agreement that was entered into in 2017, I believe we spent the better part of a year and a half and reports back and forth to council and negotiation before we finally got that agreement that he agreed to, and that was signed and registered.
And-
No, it didn't. There was a request initially of a 12-year payment plan. And then we went back after we concluded that it was too difficult to inflate the costs over time, and there was too much risk. So went back to a 5-year agreement, and that's where we landed at the end of the day. But there were many reports. I'm sure you're thinking about, the many, because like I said, there was 8 from 2011 to 2017, and there were reports previous to that.
And then so from 1985-ish is when these came in, and 2003 is when Murray bought it. There was nothing there?
No,
Like-
Childs stopped operating they operated for quite some time, and they never expanded or drew another development permit or subdivided.
So
And
they
then
were
sold
kind
the
of-
land.
They were able to operate without the development permit because they were already operating?
Yeah, basically, they drew their development permit before offsite levies were ever required. So as long as they didn't
Change it, scope.
change anything, like add a development or do a subdivision, they could operate there as they did without triggering the requirement to pay.
Okay, this one really baffles me. Thank you for that for now.
Is there, I don't know. We're not allowed to have comments from the floor? Okay. Counselor Brandel.
A couple questions, Lori. Your report refers to an encumbrance.
Yes.
Was that ever paid?
The encumbrance is just registered on title as security, and we have not drawn on it. We would not draw on that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking like
Until
a
there's a default.
letter of credit or something. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So say we want to say that he has to pay this, we send him the letter, and he doesn't.
So then the next thing I would do is I would be contacting Brownlee, and they would be sending him a letter, a legal letter indicating that he's in default in accordance with the agreement, and advising that we will be pursuing legal action if he doesn't pay, drawing on the encumbrance that's registered on title.
Right.
Yep.
Counselor Adams.
Was there ever interest charged on this levy?
No. So once the development agreement is entered
Yeah.
into and the amount goes in, the levies are not adjusted anymore.
Counselor Adams.
My understanding of this in the past is there was a title change back in 86. Then there was a title change again, and then it got changed again to Murray in 2007. Now, if that's the role of it, if there was no development permit right from 86, 2006, 2007, and then we do development, that's when the levy would trigger?
That's right. Unless there was a subdivision application, either or, one of those two things. So the property could change hands and the new owner just not do anything with it. They move in and use it as it's set up and continue that way. So it would only be whether they, and not all, in accordance with our offsite levy policy, not all developments will trigger the requirement to pay offsite levies. For instance, if you, let's say you bought a piece of property that had a house on it, our policy doesn't apply here anyway, but, and you wanted to build a shed in the backyard. We would not charge you the offsite levy because you were drawing a development permit for a shed. It would have to be a large permanent structure like single family dwelling, I think a detached garage qualified, industrial building, commercial building, those sorts of things. So there's lots of, minor development that could occur on the site that would not trigger the requirement to pay an offsite levy. So it would have to be something substantial or a subdivision. And in the case of that property, no development occurred on that property at all. After he started operating Child's Mobile Homes, nothing else. He operated there for an extensive amount of time and then he stopped operating and sold the property, but nothing. There were no subdivisions and no developments on that. Just operated as was. Yeah, again, that's a development permit that would not trigger the requirement to pay an offsite levy.
It's not up for discussion right now, guys.
Counselor Grumler.
Okay, so now I'm trying to get as much info as I can for this. So now we're parking on the land.
That what's happening on the land is a storage yard.
Okay, so.
That's what, so a storage yard is a use that was, yeah,
And it's like $285,000 to store stuff on the land that you already own. That's like, I'm trying to figure out what, this is a lot of money.
well, the reality is that the way the Municipal Government Act is written is the municipality can ask for an offsite levy anytime a development permit of any kind is asked or is applied for. It's the town of Slave Lake that set into motion the policy that put a limit around the type of development. So technically, in accordance with the MGA, we could ask for it for a development permit to occupy space. But we don't. We ask for it for a larger development.
Counselor Adams.
So then in 2008, we have a subdivision plan. So is that when all this was deemed as being due? And then we deferred from 2008?
No, we didn't have a subdivision plan in 2008. We had there was a 3-lot subdivision adjacent to Caribou Trail, but this piece of land has not been subdivided. It's still a remnant of. There's no bit, when this land develops in terms of a subdivision or a large scale development goes on, there'll be offsite levies and Caribou Collector Road levies that would, and the Second Ave road construction will be handled underneath the subdivision of that land when and if that ever happens in the future.
That's separate to.
That's separate to this, yeah.
So
Okay.
I'm,
Sorry, Lori,
Yeah.
just 2 questions. What was the triggering development permit that triggered
that's
these
what
offsite
that was
levies?
my
That was the
question.
storage yard.
The storage yard.
There was
And 2 of those
from-
fees are calculated on a ratio basis based on the land size?
Yes, there is a per hectare value based on the region that your land sits in and times multiplied by the size of the parcel. is how
So a
we come-
small piece of land parking 1 truck would have a very small potentially offsite levy calculated, or a large piece of land that had a significant commercial.
Yes, it's based on the
Capability.
size of the parcel.
Correct.
It's a per hectare value. So the larger the parcel, the larger the offsite levy. That's why we looked at the option of potentially subdividing off a parcel, you know, an acre or two to create a smaller storage yard, but that wasn't going to work for Mr. Broadhead. So that option we didn't proceed with, or he didn't proceed with. So we looked at that. We explored at, you know, how can we reduce that levy down to a more manageable size? But in order to be able to utilize the whole parcel, which is happening, the entire parcel is being utilized for storage yard, triggered the requirement for the offsite levy.
We can't have comments from the gallery right now. Sorry, Murray. Councillor Adams.
So with the subdivision plan and in what's Murray saying because of the development in the past, is there, since the business went out back in early 80s, then it transferred land in 86, it transferred land again, it's been vacant and unused for business. He purchased it, subdivided that off, correct? For your current build?
He subdivided 3 lots off of that big chunk.
And then did you pay subdivision or did you offsite levies on those?
On those 3, yes.
Okay, and then, but these 13 acres here now were 13 acres? Okay, here now, since it wasn't developed, still required to pay offsite levies if you do it.
That's right. Because the offsite levies that were paid were calculated on the size of each of the 3 parcels that were created, which is, I don't know if they're a little over an acre or how big they are, but they would have been, you would have paid levies based on the area of each of those 3 parcels. And they were paid. Yeah, so it's just this remnant 13-acre parcel where the offsite levies have not been paid.
I was jotting down notes and you might have answered it when Steve was asking his question. So the front 3 where his businesses are now.
Yeah, fronting onto
That
Caribou.
Was that developed before or was that not developed?
It was all part of that parcel, and that was the first subdivision out that Mr. Broadhead did on that chunk of land, was those first 3 lots that front onto Caribou Trail.
But that's not where this Chili's Homes was.
Yeah.
was it?
No, well, yes,
Yeah,
it was
that
all
was
one big
one.
piece.
Yes. You had 1 trailer sitting at.
But
2
when you ask for offsite levies, when a subdivision is triggered, you ask for the lots that are actually being created, not for the entire
Mhm.
chunk. So the
Makes it
offsite
affordable
levies
for
doesn't,
Somebody who's trying to develop in. phase.
yes.
Thank you.
Kim is asking, is there any proof that Mr. Broadhead knew the offsite levies for this property? Knew about these offsite levies at the time of purchase?
Is there any proof that he knew about the offsite levies at the time he
That's the
purchased?
question. Yes.
That's the question she's asking. Yeah.
I would have to go back and look at the land base file. Since it's pre-2011, I don't know that I would have any records with respect to that.
Councillor Adams.
That I don't know if it's actually valid because it is Alberta law, it's caveat emptor, it's buyer beware. He had to do his own research on the property to find out what levies are due and not due, what debt is owed or not owed, or whatever the case may be.
And I believe in this case, Mr. Broadhead indicated he did not use a lawyer to facilitate this purchase, right? Or a realtor, sorry, yeah. So, correct, yeah.
Councillor Brandel.
Just a quick question about the history. You're talking about the stockpiles of concrete and construction. Was that dealt with?
Yeah. In terms of, was the enforcement cleaned up and all that? Yes. Yeah, it took a few years, but yes, we got through the enforcement on that one.
Okay, so did that actually trigger would that have triggered the offsite levy?
we were negotiating with him at that point, trying to get him to pay the offsite levies when the storage yard and that. I'd have to go back and look at how it all transpired, but we started it with an enforcement and indicated that you're actually using it, you know, to stockpile. And then he, you know, pleaded with council for time to remove the stockpiles, and after about a couple of years, they came off. So they didn't trigger, but all the way through, we're working with these illegal developments and enforcement on and trying to, you know, okay, well, if you're going to do this, then you need a development permit and it's going to trigger. Well, then that would come off and the site would be, you know, left empty for a while, and then something else would appear. We'd send we go out and do enforcement. We'd have the discussion again. We'd do reports about options to consider, and et cetera, and on and on.
Councillor Moallem.
Is the camp that's on there right now, which property is that on? Is that
It's on the,
original or the second?
It's on the first 3 lots. So it's right at the back end of the property.
Okay.
Exists, so it's not on the storage yard property.
Councillor Gramlich.
I understand that obviously this is our number that we've come up with somehow, but I want to hear from the rest of council, like there's parcel of land that we're parking equipment on, and there's some oil field equipment on it. So someone's parking equipment on the land they own. And I get this is our bylaws, but like we're gonna charge someone to pay $285,000 to park equipment in their land. There's no actual development other than storing equipment. I will chime in on that. Go first, Steve.
So then if you wanted to just park a few trailers on the land, then I guess subdivide off half an acre and pay the development fee on that. What is that? On half an acre?
On a half, well,
Or let's go an acre, nice round number.
235,000 is on 13 acres. So I don't know, let's guess that we're looking at about 30,000, something like that. I don't know. I can't do the math in the top.
21,923 on the number owed. So let's change.
Is that an option?
Yeah, it was an option that was explored, but it was not conducive.
Okay, so in that time, have we offered a chance to pay this monthly? Like have been?
Yep.
Have we, and that's been over what now, about 15 years, since 2008?
We have
13 years?
been
Geez, I can't do
discussing
math.
options since prior to 2011. But Mr. Broadhead has to agree to the options that come forward. So we explored lots, and lots of the times when the security that was required or whatever wouldn't work for him. So we landed finally in 2017 on this agreement that he agreed to. But prior to that, there was many, like I said, 8 reports over a course of 7 years or 6 years or whatever it was. And some prior to that, trying to come up with a solution for payment of those offsite levies. So yes, we did look at subdividing land off. We looked at monthly payment installments. We looked at longer term period of time, I think a 12-year period, but the security for that was too much, and he wasn't willing. And I think council was asking for a letter of credit at that time, and he wasn't willing to provide that. So, yeah.
Councillor Ferguson.
I agree the offsite levies are high, but the offsite levies are based off of engineering estimates in order to put in necessary infrastructure. If Mr. Broadhead doesn't pay this, who's going to pay it? It falls on the backs of the general taxpayer. So if we are going to consider waiving, we are going to be setting a precedent. What we do for one, we will need to do for everybody else, anybody else who's had an existing development on their property. We need to have a larger discussion about do we refund offsite levies for everybody else as well? We're setting a very dangerous precedent if we go ahead and we agree to waive them. It'll leave a massive funding deficit in our budget.
Councillor Brandel.
Yeah, my worry is setting the precedent as well. So this agreement was, like many options were given to him, but only this one, he actually signed and agreed
That's
to,
correct.
right? So it's a legal document that he actually put pen to paper and signed it.
Yep.
So it is enforceable.
Yes, we had a council motion. It was signed and the encumbrance was registered on title. So it is legal and binding.
Councillor Adams.
just ask one more quick question. From then to now, what's our, if we're doing offsite levies today, is it higher than what this is? Or have we-
No, actually,
numbers?
I don't, in 2018, we updated the development charge study, so I'd have to go back and look at what the calculation would be based on today, because I don't know. But in 2008, we updated the development charge study because there were quite a few loans that had come off the books and were paid. So in some of the regions, the offsite levies dropped considerably. Like if you look at, this is a different story, but when we looked at the school site one, the per hectare value in offsite levies, I think, dropped $30,000 per hectare, going from the 2017 value to 2018, because there were all these loans that were paid off and the per hectare value dropped in the amount of money that we had to collect. That's why we update that study every 5 years to make sure that it's, one, keeping pace with inflation, and two, that it's reflecting our current financial situation in respect to those levies, that whatever loans have been paid are reflected and those charges are updated and changed to reflect that.
So is this then something we can explore if it's like, really, if he owes 285,000 on a development that I get it was development, but not a significant development. If it works out with the new numbers that say it's $179,000,
Well,
does something like that play
I think
in
it
that
sets a
we'd be able to-
precedence again, because you're going to have those developers who are going to tell you, well, I paid in 2017 and I paid at the old rate. And now that the rate is dropped by 30,000 per hectare, I want you to go back and relook at it, because really
Fair enough.
it's the same thing. It's all about when the development permit is applied for and the triggering event happens.
I have a question regarding the option that was kind of discussed regarding the subdivision of the 1 acre parcel. What is that a significant process?
There's an
Fees?
application, there's the fee for the town of Slave Lake is probably the cheapest cost. It's $500 to apply for subdivision, and then you pay for a tentative plan, a subdivision prepared by an Alberta land surveyor. And then we go through the process and it gets registered with Alberta land titles. So your biggest costs are really the survey costs and servicing costs, if you're servicing, depending on what you're doing there.
What about the lot layout, Lori? Where that one piece, that 1 acre potential piece is located in the lot would have to have its own access?
Yes, it would. You would have to have your own access, and you may have to bring in servicing, and depending on what you want to do with your land, and it's, you know, it is Mr. Broadhead's land.
Yeah.
It just wasn't going to work with what he envisioned for his parcel and what he wanted to do with it. So it wasn't an option that went anywhere. It wasn't selected as an option.
So it may not be a cost-effective solution,
Yeah, I was
especially if you got to put in a road that needs to access that land. That could be to a new buyer, a new seller, whatever the case may be. You can't just put a 1 acre parcel in the back corner and expect that we just wash our hands of the whole deal, right? There's requirements set for every subdivision.
No, I was just inquiring based on the process, and that's why,
Right,
because I
right.
figured it was.
That circles me back to the point that like, this isn't a subdivision. There's like
No.
service rigs being parked on it.
Offsite levy bylaw is very clear. It's a development permit or a subdivision that triggers the requirement. Yep.
Councilor Randall.
I will make a motion. Okay, where is the motion? I move that council direct administration to advise Mr. Broadhead in writing that the offsite levies in the amount of $285,363 for Plan 0823419, Block 1, Lot 4 must be paid immediately, or the town will pursue legal action under the default sections of the development agreement dated May 5th, 2017.
Okay, there is a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? Councilor Adams.
One last question. I think you touched on it, Bryce, but I just want to clarify. If this does get waived for whatever reason, that $285,363 and that expense to do what for the offsite levies will have to be borne by the taxpayer across the town.
Yeah, basically the offsite levies that are collected go into, they have to be accounted for in
Yeah.
a reserve. And those monies are used to pay for upgrades to the water treatment plant, sewage treatment.
So basically, we'd have
lift
to
stations.
make a budgetary account to
You would.
fund the deficit into that reserve
Yeah,
fund.
you would have a shortfall of that 283,000 in that fund.
So
That
that's
is used to pay for,
that's approximately a 3% tax increase.
But I'll counter that by saying, if this Chili's Homes had done it, but we don't know, it might have got lost in a fire. They probably didn't, but I'm just saying, like, they were developed there. It doesn't exist. We're not underfunding something. It never existed. It's just money. It's an arbitrary,
Have to fund it,
for what, when?
because we have to allocate it.
you. Well, the
Well, this-
reality,
That's my point. This was then, and now we're going back now, like
I
it.
just want to interject for 1 second. It's not, Chili's may have or may, Childs may have or may not have. They did not pay an offsite levy because the development permit was issued before we ever had an offsite levy bylaw in place. So we know those fees were never collected. That's a known.
Yeah, like that's the point you guys are missing there. So pretend hypothetical that Apex started in 1986 and it was there. It's the same thing. This money is not underfunded. It didn't exist.
Counselor Adams.
So then when we had Halliburton sitting over on Main Street or just off of Sixth Ave, and we tore that down, we ripped up the road, put in a new road, dropped in 7-Eleven, charged them levies. You're saying they shouldn't have paid levies? So we have to refund them?
No,
that
I'm
money?
saying
And then
there's
that
nothing
also
happening
took
there.
the development of the mall, which like right where we are right now, they should not have paid levies. So then we got to refund that.
I'm saying we're gonna charge someone $285,000 to park vehicles on the land they already own. If he builds a shop tomorrow, that's something
This
that,
bylaw was in place prior to him purchasing the property. It's a known fact. So done.
maybe he paid before the fire and we lost that then.
No, he
Maybe that
didn't. He
should-
bought the
I know,
property in
I'm
two
joking.
thousand six or two
I
thousand.
don't agree with it, but we could vote on it.
Any further discussion? Okay, I will call to question those in favor. All those opposed? And that is carried. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Question period. Do we have any questions? For CAO.
It's not for me to ask.
That's what I said. I'm asking to the group, but looking at you, so it's confusing. Steve, do you have any questions?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, shut up now.
Come on.
As we have no questions, it has been a long week since the last meeting. We will move on to correspondence.
Okay, so before you, unfortunately, sir, we didn't receive a formal request or on letterhead, but we received a request from Joe McGregor on behalf of Community Futures, we believe, requesting a proclamation or consideration for a proclamation from council as it relates to Lemonade Day on June 17th, 2023. Before you, you have the proclamation that was supplied for your consideration and or decision.
Okay. So do you want to go ahead? Counselor Adams?
No, I was thinking we had to have a motion to say you do the proclamation.
Do we have to have a motion? Yes. Okay. Counselor
That
Adams.
motion.
All right, any further discussion? All right, call to question those in favor. And that is carried. Okay, so then I have to make the proclamation. That's my first proclamation.
Enthusiasm.
Enthusiastically.
Yeah,
Oh, boy.
big whereases.
Whereas Lemonade Day is a free community-wide educational event providing children with the opportunity to learn and apply entrepreneurial thinking and create a foundation for success in the global economy. And whereas Lemonade Day exists to infuse today's youth with spirit of enterprise, teaching the basic business and entrepreneurial skills necessary to become successful contributing members of the communities. And whereas Lemonade Day has a core philosophy of spend, save, and share that is implemented by teaching children how to start, own, and operate a business, learn goal setting, develop a business plan, establish a budget, seek investors, provide customer service, and give back to the community. And whereas Lemonade Day offers opportunities for families, businesses, schools, youth organizations, neighborhoods, institutes of higher learning, and government agencies to unite for a common purpose to train the next generation of entrepreneurs. And whereas Lemonade Day is a day of learning and celebrating Northern Alberta's future. Oh, we have 2 different days. Is it the 17th or the 18th? This reads twice. We'll go with the 17th. On June 17th, every citizen has a job either buying or helping children sell lemonade. And therefore, be it resolved that Francesca Ward, Mayor of the town of Slave Lake, on behalf of this council, do hereby proclaim June 17th, 2023 to be Lemonade Day in the town of Slave Lake and encourage every citizen to purchase a cup of lemonade from one of the youths participating in the program to demonstrate how our community cares for the future of our youth. And so it is proclaimed. State of the Lake. Does anyone have anything for State of the Lake?
Steve did.
Councillor Moallem does.
I would just like to give a big pat on the back to the Chamber of Commerce for hosting the trade show this past weekend. I've been working on the trade show committee for a number of years. I helped start it. It was my idea a whole bunch of years ago. And it's a struggle every year. And when I walked in this year, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It's exactly kind of what I envisioned from the beginning. She had some great vendors in there. There was some really good feedback. The unfortunate part is we had wildfires all throughout our region and not very many people got to enjoy it. But I do want to give them a pat on the back for the effort, because I think if you know, in a different circumstance, that would have been a huge success. And I think we have something to build on for the future, but I don't want them to feel that it wasn't a success, because it was a lot of hard work that was put into it and it did look absolutely fantastic. So I just want to give them a shout out.
Thank you. Anything else?
So I'll go then. Everyone's done. So this year would be our 10-year anniversary with Icebreaker. And typically we have a big event and it costs a bit of money. We get lots of corporate sponsorship and we raise a bunch of money, but we want to do something a little bit different where everyone gets to come and everyone is involved. So we partnered with the chamber during Riverboat Days. Toco, Whitecap, Even Construction, Total, SLH have all come on board as sponsors so far. We have a completely, and Matthew Hernick LLP, and we have a completely free community concert for the whole town with a friend of mine, Gord Bamford, who's been here a few times. And what's cool is it's for everybody. So 6,000 residents could come and enjoy a concert for free. So we're pretty excited to do that.
And it'll be outdoors.
Yeah,
and
outdoors at the MRC, July 5th, kickoff Riverboat Days.
Wednesday, July 5th. And if you also look at I'll just chime in there. If you look at the Slave Lake and District Chamber of Commerce Facebook page over the next week, you'll see the rest of the events being laid out for Riverboat Days. There will be a parade on Friday, followed by some downtown activities brought to you by like a subcommittee of the downtown retailers. And then on Saturday, we have a downtown retail event with details to be released, as well as fireworks planned for that evening. So the details will be brought forth and there's few pieces being added. So just wanted to get that on everybody's radar for that weekend. As well as the provincial election forum is tomorrow evening. It is from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Gathering Place. So that will be your opportunity to hear the candidates that will be there. We have Danielle and Scott and Bert that will all be there that evening. This will also be live streamed on the Chamber Facebook page as well. It's more a Chamber update mostly because we had the meeting today and there's a bunch of events before the next committee of the whole. Councillor Adams.
Motion go into closed.
All right, any discussion? Call to question those in favor. And